Welcome everyone to the online press conference hosted by the California Human Trafficking Survivors and Anti-Trafficking Organizations to urge Governor Newsom to veto SB 357. My name is Rima Nashashibi and I'm founder and president of Global Hope 365, a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose goal is to end harmful practices against women and girls, such as child marriage, human trafficking, and other forms of gender-based violence. This webinar is a press conference is being recorded, and the link will be included in the press release following the press conference and on our YouTube channel. Please post your question in the Q&A. The speakers will attempt to answer all your questions during the press conference. We will end at 12:30 p.m. sharp. SB 435 was sent to enrollment on Monday, June 20. The next step is the presentation to the governor for signature. The timing is interesting, though, was the bill held at the Senate desk until after the recall and the primary election ended. Sometimes legislation is introduced without researching through the unintended consequences, and SB 435 is one such bill, as Assemblywoman Kari Pichi Norris indicated in the Assembly floor when she voted against it. The bill is dangerous and is the first step towards full legalization of prostitution. A false narrative was used when the bill was drafted. We reject the idea that decriminalizing loitering will make conditions safer for women and girls who are victims of sex trafficking. Global Hope 365 stands firmly in opposition of SB 435. I strongly urge the governor to veto it. This bill puts the most vulnerable members of society at risk. It legalizes loitering for exploiters, both traffickers and buyers, thereby making it all but impossible for law enforcement to intervene to protect those most abused on the street and in marginalized communities. Some research indicates that women and girls are 90% of victims of human trafficking. By signing this bill, Governor, you are siding with those who believe that it's okay to buy and sell women and children to satisfy men's sexual desires, as if there is a class of humanity who are simply there to satisfy men. There can be no equity and equality in this country when half the population sees members of the other half as nothing other than vessels for their sexual pleasure. Our first speaker is Assemblywoman Kari Pichi Norris, representing the 74th Assembly District. Welcome, Assemblywoman Kari Pichi Norris.
Well, good morning, or good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Rima. My apologies, I am in between events, and so I'm going to do this from my car. I just want to say thank you to Rima, thank you to all of the organizers, and thank you to everyone who's participating today for everything that you do to protect women, protect young girls, and protect our most vulnerable communities here in California and all across the country. The topic of today's conversation, SB 357, is a bill that I voted against on the Assembly floor, and as Rima noted, did speak against as well. And the thing with this bill is that it really is, it's a double-edged sword. So it has been presented by advocates, it's been presented by organizations who are often my allies as a way to protect our vulnerable communities, as a way to protect particularly transgendered and other vulnerable individuals from harassment and discrimination. But this bill is also one with immense unintended consequences. And those unintended consequences, I believe, do put young women, young girls, and really and truly our most vulnerable Californians at a greater risk of human trafficking. And as a legislator, I am always mindful of the unintended consequences of the policies that we propose. And when I had advocates approach me about this bill, when I had organizations like Global Hope 365 reach out to me and explain that the unintended consequences of this bill are not minor, the unintended consequences of this bill really and truly could be a matter of life and death. And that is why I voted against this bill. That's why I'm joining you as part of today's event. And that's why I continue to urge my colleagues to find a different approach and a different strategy to ensure that we can protect and lift up all Californians. So with that, thank you again, Rima, for your advocacy and your leadership and for inviting me to join you today.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for correcting me. Yes, it's SB 357. Thank you, Assemblywoman Kari Bichunas. Our next speaker is Marjorie Saylor. She's survivor leader and a founder and CEO of the Well Path.
Thank you, Rima. I've been working with survivors of sex work and as well as human sex trafficking for the last several years. And I've worked with over hundreds of women and some men and other identifying as other genders. So we have a very clear idea the vulnerabilities and the risk factors that push people into being exploited with sex trafficking, particularly, and including my own story, my own survival of the adult industry. I started out as a sex worker. I started out as someone who was very proud to be a sex worker, which I'm using that term, but I hate that term because it is not work. It is exploitation at its finest. And coming into it, going into it, I didn't realize it was a need to survive. I didn't realize that it was all the grooming that I had experienced in my childhood.
Yeah.
And the stories that I hear on and on and on from the clients that we serve, the same thing, these early childhood vulnerabilities that groom them into being at risk of being exploited. Early childhood sexual abuse, neglect. You start when you are sexually abused early on as a child, you start to think sex equals love, abuse equals love, and you start to have a distorted idea of what a healthy relationship looks like, a healthy sexual relationship looks like. And so going into the adult industry for me, I felt empowered at the time because I had the opportunity to say what, who, when, and where, or so I thought. But going into it, a year into it, I wanted to die. I wanted to commit suicide. I was so emotionally and spiritually bankrupt from that lifestyle. And it just confirmed more and more that I was worth nothing more than sex, than what my body could offer someone. And it was a horrible experience. And so there's no 401k plan, there's no insurance benefits, there is nothing out there good enough that could ever get me to want to go back and do that again. Coming out of it, by the way, I was sex trafficked out of the adult industry, out of the legal channels of the adult industry. That's where I ended up being sex trafficked. And so you can't have one without the other. You're either trafficked into it or you're trafficked out of it, out of the legal channels. And so I urge you strongly to reconsider this as signing SB 357.
Thank you. We're urging the governor to veto SB 357. Tika Thomton, survivor leader.
Hello, everyone. So my experience, I am a survivor of sex trafficking. Just a real brief, I'm from Los Angeles, California, and my trafficking started at the age of 12. And I was in the life until the age of 23. Coming out of it, now at the age that I am now, and working with a nonprofit organization that has worked very closely with law enforcement, I see the benefits of the loitering tool for law enforcement. There are so many things that a lot of people are not thinking about when we talk about loitering and law enforcement and how that works. Working with the exploited peoples and also victims and those that are at risk of being trafficked, walking down the street in certain areas that are known for prostitution and trafficking situations, law enforcement use this tool to protect the community from people that are loitering, driving around in particular communities and populations for recruitment, and also for Johns and or buyers buying people that are not engaging in sex work, like children. And also, there was a point in my life where I was kidnapped. I was sold into human trafficking, and I was even put in a trunk in the area in South Central Los Angeles on Figueroa Boulevard, where a lot of this is happening in LA. And even though I got out of the situation without the aid of law enforcement, it would have been great if someone would have saw something, or law enforcement would have had an inkling that something was wrong with this particular driver and pulled this guy over and found out that I was in a car. I was in the trunk. That could have saved my life. Or even going around in particular neighborhoods where there is sex work happening and talking to the people that are engaging in sex work and doing a wellness check just to see if they're okay, just to see if they needed their assistance in any way, with using the loitering for the intent to solicit as a reason to question, as a reason to do this wellness check. Even perpetrators, even predators that are out there to harm people that have no intentions of engaging in sex work in a ethical way, whatever that means. Because there are people that are out there that are not looking for a sexual interaction with someone. They're looking to harm them and to pull someone over to see if they have a weapon of any sort. Handcuffs, zip ties, rope, any of those things that can aid in the harm or the potential harm of someone could save a life. We're so focused on giving a certain population of people the right to do what they feel is right with their bodies. But we're not looking at the vulnerable population of people that will grow. The people there's so many people right now that are at risk, that are that harm has already come to. The numbers will increase because there will be no law enforcement around. Because if there's no loitering, and that is a huge part of what's going on in these neighborhoods where sex work is happening. Law enforcement are in these areas because they have that tool. They're not getting any calls because it's like a secret society of people when it comes to sex work and human trafficking. They're not out telling everything that's going on within this enterprise. So using this tool allows law enforcement to be in the area if they feel, or not even if they feel, just so they can be able to make sure that the community, the people that are engaging in sex work, are safe. And also, it just boggles my mind. Instead of us talking about holding those that abuse this tool accountable for their actions, because I have worked with amazing people in law enforcement that use this tool with integrity, really care about this population of people. So we don't want to mix up the ones that abuse this from the ones that use this to actually help. So please reconsider this, because there hasn't been any policies, there hasn't been any procedures to ensure safety of this population. They're just trying to get rid of it before they make any plans. So I just believe personally, Tika, feel that this should be vetoed. Thank you.
You're on mute, Rima.
Thank you, Marjorie and Tika, survivor leaders, for your strong voices in urging Governor Newsom to veto SB 357. Now we're going to Vanessa Russel, founding executive director of Love Never Fails.
Well, good afternoon. I'm just so grateful to express from an NGO nonprofit that is working, housing survivors of human trafficking over the last 11 years, over 200 individuals, women, men, children, and also who have been providing workforce development for those populations in terms of getting them into sustainable careers in IT, in the health industry, in the medical industry. My thoughts on this are there's a couple different things. First of all, I think it's really important that we acknowledge, as Tika said, that this bill falls short. It has been developed without thinking through the survivor, the impact to the children and the innocent, vulnerable adults that are out there that don't want to be there. When you remove the only layer of intervention without solid proof of human trafficking, right? Loitering is an opportunity for law enforcement to look into, is this a child? Is this a vulnerable individual that wants to get out, and gives them a moment to opt out? Whereas the proposed solution with SB 357 basically removes the only layer of intervention that is available throughout the state. Now, some of the nonprofits that are advocating for SB 357 are saying, well, we are the intervention, but unfortunately their presence is only available in a couple of counties throughout the state. So we can't make a statewide law that is only going to rely on nonprofits in Orange County or in San Francisco. I think there's one that says that they're going to do this kind of intervention in San Francisco. No, there's 58 counties in California, and every single county must have a replacement for police intervention if you're going to introduce this kind of legislation. Moreover, if you're going to introduce it, you must have exit services built in. And because this bill has no appropriations built in for any exit services, housing will not be offered. Workforce development will not be offered. Mental health services, the trauma that individuals, as Marjorie was mentioning, endure. They're suicidal, they're hurting. They need the right kind of trauma-informed intervention. Now, I'm not saying that law enforcement is always that right kind of intervention, but I am saying that oftentimes law enforcement is connected to a Bay Area legal aid, or a San Francisco Women Against Rape, or a rape trauma center, these kinds of agencies, and they are brought into these scenarios to provide intervention. In the current proposal, there is nothing. There is no replacement strategy. There are no exit strategies. The people are literally left to fend for themselves in their own mental trauma and say, I need help, while they're being watched watched like a slave, watched like an animal, chained up somewhere. And I know there are many that are saying, well, I'm independent, I don't need that. And I would say to you, I understand that, but we have to think of the whole. What's good for the one can't be applied to the whole until we think of the whole. The other piece that we need to think about is this bill would also not allow the police to follow up on demand, the buyers, the exploiters, they would no longer be held accountable. Did you know there were 68 exploiters that were arrested using 653.22, which is the penal code that is utilized for loitering for the purpose of prostitution? 68 in Oakland. 9 children were rescued in Oakland with this penal code. If you remove this code, you basically let those 68 off the hook. You forget about those 9 children, and you provide an open door for more to come to California to prey upon vulnerable women, children, LGBTQ plus men, whoever. I don't believe that this industry is satisfactory for anyone. It is historically racist, misogynistic, and anti-women, anti-anyone who wants to have agency over their body will tell you. I thought I had agency when I was working in this space. I actually didn't have agency. I was being coerced. I was being manipulated. I was being controlled. And years after they get out, they go, thank goodness I got out, because that was nothing that they ever wanted for themselves. I want the Marjories and the Tikas to be able to have their best lives, and not to be reduced to this kind of life to provide for themselves. Exit services is what we need. And I'll hand it back to you, Rima. Thank you so much. We want veto for SB 357. Thank you, Governor. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Vanessa. And at this time, before we get to Dr. Powell, I would like to indicate that Bridge Network, a CBO from Sacramento, strongly opposes SB 357, and they have worked for commercial sexually exploited children and teens and young adult victims. This bill will continue to re-victimize our most vulnerable communities and not add any protections. The average entry age is 13 years of sexual exploitation, are often in the foster system, socioeconomic status, and have early childhood trauma. This bill will remove most safely parameters for law. Thank you, Bridge Network. And at this time, we would like to hear from Dr. Stephany Powell, Director of Law Enforcement Training and Survivor Services at the National Center of Sexual Exploitation.
Thank you very much, Rima. Thank you. There's 2 words that the authors of 357 are not talking about. And those 2 words are procurement and soliciting. And when I speak about that, I'm talking about the terms that are used in Penal Code 653.22. Because if you read that, in order to understand why it should not be repealed, you have to understand what's in that penal code. What it basically says is that a sex buyer that is going around the corner in a neighborhood several times, that person is soliciting, and they too are loitering for the purposes of prostitution. Procurement, that goes toward the trafficker. If a trafficker is soliciting people for the purposes of prostitution in order to procure them into prostitution, those 2 words are embedded, and it's very clear in the penal code that they're trying to repeal. That specifically speaks to sex trafficking. So if we allow that to happen, if we repeal that, and that becomes legal, sex buyers will be able to go into the same neighborhoods that this bill is supposed to protect, and to be able to solicit those for the purposes of prostitution. Traffickers will be able to go into a community and procure people into prostitution, and that will be legal. Governor, is that really what you want? Because I'm telling you, when you talk to the community, it's not what they want. And lastly, I was a Los Angeles police officer for 30 years. I ran a vice unit. I am telling you, I have used 653.22 and have found victims of human trafficking in that way. My counterparts that are still working the streets are still doing the same thing. Tika talked about being placed in a trunk. Please know that that's not unusual. Pimps will often transport the girls in the trunk. Why? Because they don't want to be out there in the first place. It's a form of punishment. If I see that same pimp, trafficker, wherever you want to call him, that's circling that block a few times, I make that traffic stop, guess what? My reason for detention is using that penal code. But guess what also happens? When law enforcement stops a particular vehicle, they normally will focus on the trunk. You guys don't know that, but that's what they do. And that's just in any traffic stop because people can hide in the trunk. Imagine that car that she was in, if she was in the trunk and an officer knew that or picked up on that. She talked about that law enforcement had not been able to intervene. An officer that makes that type of stop would be able to intervene. And what makes him able to detain that person and that car is because they could use 653.22. Governor, I am asking you, do not take away the very tool that is going to be able to help people in the community. If you do that, they will be abandoned.
Thank you
Your Honor.
to the survivor leaders, Assemblyman County Petrie Norris, Vanessa Russel. Again, we have a few minutes. If you have any questions, post them in the Q&A. I would like also to mention that legislators can use other venues to urge the governor to veto SB 357, which some of our elected Republican leaders have done so. And so, again, it's a public letter of what legislators can do, urging the governor to veto SB 357. We're going to give it a few minutes. Okay, I see. Can someone address how SB 357 will have nationwide consequences?
I'll take that. This is how it has national consequences. We're already looking at a national push to fully decriminalize prostitution. For California, this is going to start to open the door. When you look at Vermont, when you look at Oregon, this is a conversation that's being had. And so if we allow, this does not get vetoed, this just opens the door for full decriminalization. And let me just say this very quick. This is what full decriminalization means. What it means is that anything that's prostitution related is going to be okay. That means that your next door neighbor could open a brothel. That's what full decrim means. You can't even open a weed shop because it's legal, but it's not decriminalized. So there are parameters that will be set. With full decriminalization, there are none. And so we cannot open the door just a little bit to let this conversation fully develop. And the next thing we know, we're having the same conversation about full decriminalization.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. Any other panelists would like to answer that question?
Well, I just wanted to say that one of the things that we need to think about here is we don't want to be a state that sets the stage. As we know, we're one of the largest state, and we can set the stage for the country on how laws are adopted and pushed. And I believe that we are a state that believes in taking care of children and taking care of women and taking care of members of the LGBTQ community, vulnerable people. We know that there's tons of vulnerability. We have rental instability here. We have a very heavy homelessness issue. This is going to be a predator's playground. Because wherever you have vulnerability, you have housing depravity, you have food scarcity, you have people who are runaways, people who are in need. That is where the exploiters go. That is where the buyers go. So by removing this lock that we have right now, Not only will it make California the place to be for exploitation, but it will open the door for the rest of the nation to follow suit. We don't want to be the first, we don't want to be a large state that says this is good for vulnerable people to be harmed in this way. We want to be a state that provides pathways to safety, pathways to dignity, pathways to alternatives to human trafficking.
Thank you, Vanessa. We also wanted you to know that there has been a veto letter that was sent to the governor that was signed by 1,520 survivor leaders, elected officials, advocacy organizations, and individuals who are strongly urging Governor Newsom to veto SB 357. And again, as a reminder, we will post the videotaping of this on our YouTube channel at Global Hope 365. Thank you, everyone, for attending as panelists and also as attendees, and for augmenting the strong voices urging the government to veto SB 357.